Welcome everybody here tonight for the Oxford Group, Part 3. Just to let everybody know, next week will be a big book study with Howard Eber and Steve Woods, and that will start next week. But this week we have the incredible Drew, who is going to bring Part 3 and bring it all together for us. So Drew, it's all yours. And again, thank you, Drew, for doing this. Appreciate it. And you.
Thanks, Rob. Hey, everybody. My name's Drew, and I am an alcoholic. And let me set screen share up. And we are going to be launching out on page or part three page, definitely part three. And one of the amazing things where we left off with so far, we talked about kind of the evolution of the steps. This you know personal spiritual change aspect of the Oxford group, and it's pretty much where Alcoholics Anonymous got what we would refer to on page 9 as a practical program of action from, and so many of its qualities. And then we basically we took a little trip down, with the co-founder Sam Shoemaker, of course, and Frank Buckman, and then we kind of started to tie in a little bit of the interactions of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And of course, we talked about Dr. Bob and the Oxford group coming to Akron with Ann Smith and the whole party there, seen here represented by T. Henry and Clarice Williams, who opened their house on Palisades Drive in Akron, Ohio. And of course, Bill Wilson back in New York with the Oxford group under Sam Shoemaker. So this is just, two people that are members of, the Oxford group, are a little bit involved with Bill was. And, by the time they get to Akron, it's like, this is where the powers meet. And, it's amazing, again, tying in a little bit of Alcoholics Anonymous, when we, look at this, what's about to unfold with Bill and Dr. Bob. And we showed some of the people that Bill actually worked with very early on, upon his release from Towns Hospital. And right before he went to Akron, he approached the doctor. And I like how AA Comes of Age sums it up, because what is it, a defining moment for Alcoholics Anonymous? And one of the big ones, and this was a Silkworth contribution, again, an amazing contribution. And Bill confided in Dr. Silkworth that nobody was, getting sober. Nobody was, picking up the reins and running with it. He and Ebby were going around, described working with half a dozen to, multiples, 72, 92, depends on, what you read, and nobody was staying sober. And Silkworth laid upon Bill, this monumental advice, which was, stop preaching to them, Bill. Tell them the problem that I have done with you. You got the cart before the horse, son. Tell them, the obsessional nature coupled with the allergy, the phenomenon of craving. And that's just kind of set the stage for, Bill going to Akron. And 10 minutes after that conversation with Silkworth, just about, he goes out with this proxy fight for the National Rubber Machinery. So this is what places Bill in Akron at the time. And of course, he none other, but it just so happens that, T. Henry, his name was Thomas Henry, was one of the chief engineers for the National Rubber Machinery Company. So, in the roundtable discussion, you wonder if they, either saw each other or recognized each other, especially when the meeting begins. And we'll get to that in a second. Now, National Rubber Machinery Company, they were a huge kind of pretty much entity. They pretty much made things that they had offices in New Jersey and Akron and all over the place, Clifton, New Jersey, Columbiana, and of course Akron. And this, again, these are just two things, examples of their machinery. These are actually really large. This one, they're both about 18 feet high, so huge operations. And of course, anything that extruded, the it would heat the rubber up, and out would pop like a stopper or a gasket or a tire. They made everything. And this is a nerd note of about 7, but they even made sink garbage disposals. So they kind of had their hand in everything. But again, this was all due to this proxy fight. And of course, around 1935, this proxy fight took place in Akron. And again, the chief designer engineers was, of course, T. Henry. Now, at the early time when the Oxford group came, Clarice Williams definitely went. She even brought her husband, and they actually made the decision to start a little Oxford group meeting at their home, kind of keep the magic alive. And of course, that's a photograph of T. Henry and Clarice Williams' home, 676 Palisades Drive in Akron, Ohio. And that actually came back into the hands of an alcoholic family. So it is now so if anybody goes to Founders Day, and just an interesting note, the folks that live there now are in Alcoholics Anonymous. But again, this is kind of where it all took place. This was ground zero for where the spark was struck. And this is another photograph inside again, with the chairs laid out, and I can't help but think, to just imagine, all the early members, and from the start of its earliest of earlies, to pretty much filling up the house. Another interesting note: a friend of mine from Las Vegas, always, when he went in there, he was able. Dr. Bob's house. They had Sue Smith's room upstairs where they would go up and do that third step surrender, the surrender, which kind of kicked this whole thing off. Well, they also had a third step surrender room in the Williams's house, and I wish we had a photograph of that, but more to come. But in its earliest days, this is where the magic starts. And of course, first it was T. Henry, his wife Clarice Williams. You also had Henrietta Seiberling, and we were just kind of talking about this earlier. Henrietta Seiberling had attended a lot of the Oxford Group meetings when they first came to Akron. We have Henrietta's mother-in-law going around and being an Oxford Group like keynote speaker, along with Mrs. Frances Shep Cornell and Helen Shoemaker, Sam Shoemaker's wife. They kind of did the deal. Ann Smith came, and you liked what she heard, and we saw some of the notes that she took from the Brown Haywood Library. And of course, through that individual, Delphine Weber, who accompanied with Henrietta Seiberling, brought up Dr. Bob's name as someone who could help. And of course, Anne, thinking it was a great idea, definitely, got Dr. Bob to go. But of course, when, it's kind of like in most of our stories, Dr. Bob was just going kind of to get the heat off. It's described that he attended for about a year, but he continued to drink. And then, of course, Bill shows up, and of course he's in bad shape. His the proxy fight is going down the drain. Depends on what you read, but long story short, got in touch with this gentleman, Walter Fuller Tungs, who just so happened to meet and greet Frank Buckman off the train when the Oxford Group came to Akron. And again, him saying that he's a rumhound from New York, a member of the Oxford Group, you could just kind of see how all these strings, intertwine. And man, it's just beautiful again. And again, from that point, the whole story of the AA story of the potted plant and Dr. Bob, two men, Bill and Dr. Bob, arranged to meet at the Cyberling Gatehouse. And Dr. Bob was, sporting a hefty hangover, and said, only give this guy 15 minutes. But then Bill presented Silkworth's advice. And of course, that 15 minutes turned into over 6 hours. And again, it was that one alcoholic talking to another with that identification. And of course, here's just an interesting photograph of the Cyberling Gatehouse. Now, there's a great description of Dr. Bob talking about this interaction. He says, of far more importance was the fact that he was the first living human with whom I had ever talked who knew what he was talking about in regards to alcoholism from actual experience. In other words, he talked my language. Interesting that he says that at this particular point in time. So Dr. Bob and Bill, with a new lease on life, get busy. Forward to the second edition. pretty much says the two men set to work almost frantically. The first person that they worked with was not AA number three. We'll just put this in kind of a half-chapped order. Was a doctor who, by the name of Roy H. McKay, and of course he was a complete failure to get it. Just really in bad shape. They tried. They didn't really have their, the nuts and bolts in proper order at the time for the program. But Dr. Roy H. McKay didn't get it. But there was a second that was short weeks after Bill met Dr. Bob again. He ended up staying in Akron for 3 months, but it was in this time frame, and we referred to him as Devil May Care Chap. And if you know the little history of AA, it was this guy. Again, little AA intermingling here, but this is where we introduce a gentleman by the name of Edgar Riley, or Edgar R, or Eddie R is what they called him. And of course, this is an interesting note. This was a transcribe that Bill wrote to Lois, dated June 35 from Akron, Ohio. And of course, I'll just read this because it's so cool, because it tells you exactly what they were working with right there. It says, "Darling, I love you so much. Let me tell you more about this Riley thing. It is bound to create a great sensation here, and will, I think, be the means of getting the complete confidence of Bud Firestone and Harvey, as well as innumerable others. Don't tell any more to anyone but Howard about this, and ask him not to repeat it. I don't think he or you entirely realize what extent this work will inevitably lead to a very valuable acquaintance. Dr. Bob Smith and I started to work on this chap a week ago Wednesday, got him sober. He and his wife made a surrender. Then he began witnessing to his creditors. Again, there's that surrender and sharing his witness and restitution right then and there. To his creditors and others, and he was changing very rapidly. Sunday came, and for the first time, he ate heavily. Do you remember how nervous and depressed it used to make me when I sobered up and ate heavy food? In this case, the result was actual temporary depressive mania, and he rushed away to commit suicide, and he had attempted before, being pumped out just in time. The next day, he called up from Cleveland to bid me goodbye, having found a good dock there to jump from, but having found himself unable to do it without first calling me. I advised him to drink some more and permit me to come and see him before he did anything. So we tore up to Cleveland in the middle of the night, got him here and to the hospital, and commenced to give him Towns treatment. The effect of that still, plus still more oxidizing, had been magical, and is creating a great stir at the city hospital, where the doctors are alleged being unable to do anything for these cases. Meanwhile, the effect of the group is electric. Differences are being forgotten in this new wonder. Both he and his wife are profoundly changed and are sure to create a great stir in Akron. Must go to the hospital. And this is interesting. It says Anne is writing you to come and visit, and we'll get into that because she actually will come and visit. I love you so much and so very happy, Bill. And again, this was around June 1935, and describing the at least the Oxford group approach that they had. It talks about the surrender, and especially Bud Firestone and Harvey Firestone, which we covered last week, and pretty cool. But again, the two men set to work almost frantically, and this is where kind of the AA story. A third man was visited several times. He was given the medical fact, soon followed by this spiritual solution, right? The practical program of action. His name was Bill D, AA number three, and his incredible. He is quoted as saying, looking in later, we found Bill and his wife Henrietta. Eagerly, he pointed to us, saying, "These are the fellows I told you about. These are the ones who understand. If they can do it, I can do it." Over and over, he said this to himself. Finally, out of this hope, there burst conviction. Now he was sure. Then came a great joy. Finally, He said, "Go fetch my clothes, dear. We're going to get up and get out of here." Now, the interesting thing is when he was released from Akron City Hospital, they didn't take him back to his home. They didn't take him out to dinner to get a nice juicy steak. What they ended up doing is they took him to the Oxford group meeting. And of course, that was referred to as July 4th, 1935, the beginning of the drunk squad of the Oxford group. And it could be referred to that as such. Now, again, so the Bill D came from the hospital over to the Williams's house, and of course, the cast that was there was T. Henry, his wife Clarice, Henrietta Seiberman was definitely there, Anne was there. Kind of in the alcoholic corner, you had Dr. Bob, and of course Bill and his wife Lois, who actually was visiting for 2 weeks at that time. They were there as well. You had Henrietta and his wife, or Bill and his wife Henrietta D, and then you also had Edgar Riley. So this was again that if you picture all those folks just kind of sitting in that room with the chairs, having at least the earliest of earlies of this Oxford group, centered kind of at least earmarked centered around Dr. Bob and getting him, well and sober and spiritually connected. But at this time frame, it's amazing. So as a result of the Oxford group coming to Akron, at least, intermingling with a little bit of AA, you had Bill W., Oxford group from New York, who was unfamiliar with that city, met a fellow drunk. From there, Dr. Bob, an Oxford group from Akron, meets a man who knows all about the drinking game. He spoke my language. The two men set out looking for people to help so that they can stay sober themselves. And the beginning of the steps and the fellowship were taken. As Bill put it, the spark was struck here in Akron. Again, its roots all reach all the way back to a surrender experience that took place 27 years earlier in a chapel in Keswick, England. And eventually Lois goes back. Bill eventually goes back. He stays in Akron for 3 months, and Dr. Bob and this small little contingent continue to grow. And again, Dr. Bob and AA number 3 began to slowly growing group there in Akron. And by August, Bill returns to New York with the vigor he had in Akron and threw himself harder into the work, getting 2 prospects from Towns Hospital and from Dr. Silkworth, Hank P. and Fitz M. Bill also became very active in the Oxford group, attending functions in New York and elsewhere, like this Oxford group house party in Richmond, Virginia, dated November 19th, 1935. And it's another little note from Lois. And it basically, it says, "Darling, this is Lois writing Bill. Darling, I love you so and miss you so terribly. I do hope you are happy, dear Bill. Hank phoned this AM and was surprised to hear that you had gone. While he was talking with me, a telegram came from Kathleen saying she had arrived safely and that you had also arrived. I am so anxious to hear about it all. Are there many people there? Have you met Frank B. or had a talk with Sam? I'm sure you did right in going down. Roger came in this noon and fixed my fires for me. They are coming tomorrow to stay till the 3rd. Enclosed is a surprisingly friendly note from Carol. I love you, darling, with all my whole heart and whole soul and whole body. Good night, dear. God bless you, Lois." So Bill was going back and, of course, going to house parties and like this one in Richmond. There's a couple of notes here that to talk about that. And again, the same Oxford group house parties continues to grow with T. Henry and his wife Clarice Williams there in Akron. So again, this is slowly taking form, but this is about where the AA talk kind of goes back into the Oxford group. Frank Buckman, seen in this photograph March 1st, 1933. Now, it was about a year following this picture when it became evident the eventual breakaway from AA can be seen. The shift of focus from life-changing kind of personal spiritual change to a different direction, changing on kind of everything, focusing solely on, again, influential individuals, VIPs, heads of states, involvement of nations, the aristocrats, a type of trickle down revival. If I had to put a pin on it, they began to distance themselves from individual transformation into revival of the masses. It would be in this time frame starting from 34 into 35, and by 36 an absolute change in focus, and that's kind of what we'll talk about. This is a neat little this is another house party that took place. This was in June 5th through the 12th of 1934 in Banff, Canada. So again, Bill was just about to get sober at this time. Dr. Bob was going to the Akron groups, kind of, getting the heat off his back. But of course, they were, and I love this photograph just because that is the photograph of that location. Very spiritual. Talk about a bucket list. I wouldn't mind visiting that. But again, it kind of, the North American House Party International team, and a couple of other photographs. This was them, on the canard lines, making their way up there. This was another who's who of folks that attended. But you can start seeing little tiny, at least signs of where things, at least from an AA standpoint, started to go sideways. This was a description of it. This was June 6th, 34. Again, the North American House Party. And we're not going to read this whole thing, but we will cherry pick. Number one, it says, on a world battlefront. Interesting language. It says, troops rapidly mobilizing at big house party. It says, these men and women are out to make Canada Christian. And of course, that said, by the way, that long word totalitarian is being shortened in group speech to the T plan. It means the same, and it saves time and perhaps misunderstanding. The T plan and the formation of the ways in which it can be worked out to achieve the great object of God control in every department of modern civilization, with all its reactions on the family and our assailant and on the international front. So again, you start seeing the signs. It's getting a little big, and don't get me wrong, absolutely great idea. But again, perhaps this is a direction that in time will help develop a few basic principles like spiritual organizations such as AA should and will have to stay away from in due time. Again, just an interesting little chain of events. But uh, what's really cool is, this was the start of an interaction between Frank Buckman and that gentleman. His name was Chief Walking Buffalo, and there's a couple of photographs taken from. In fact, there's an entire scrapbook of Chief Walking Buffalo, but it gives you an idea of what that Banff house party in Canada looked like. There's Buckman getting all down in the dressing garb. And Chief, this Chief Walking Buffalo is an interesting individual. I just added this because it's cool. But lay down the road, this guy gets so involved carrying, a message of stuff. Here he is meeting another chief, an actual Aboriginal tribesman in Queensland, Australia, and just an interesting, again, two chiefs and meeting together with the belief system, but pretty fascinating. Now, the Oxford Group house parties begin to grow. Again, bigger halls, and eventually like stadiums. And this one is an interesting. This was 35 in Lady Margaret Oxford Hall. 6,000 people were at this house party. Here's another one that was in a great cathedral there in Great Britain, and again, now he's starting to get with politicians and heads of state and stuff. And again, it's you can slowly see, but the so far the message is still the same, and they're trying to really bring the masses into this way of developing. I always wonder what the message in 35 and 36 would be compared to the message that was told at the New York mission back in the early 20s. Again, just an interesting little chain of events. And here's a whole series of photographs of Frank Buckman doing what he does best. Again, talking about, this change and his surrender experience, sharing his witness. And Uh, Again, all throughout Europe, here's 35 and a 36, described as, again, remember they got the name Oxford Group from the train. Well, now they got their own train. And of course, this was the train that they were going around Germany with, again, similar to the South Africa mission. But again, these health parties were attempts to bring people into being, kind of guided by God. That's a slow transition. Another photograph of the chain and the house party members getting off and kind of doing their revivals in the area. Really gives you an interesting feel for the situation. I kind of like this one. This was the Oxford Group team in Denmark, Copenhagen, 1935. So, as you can tell, these are slowly popping up all over the place. And, you put this in context and you think a little bit about, the small little, drunk squad of the Oxford Group and soon to be the Alcoholic Squadron meeting in Bill's house through the early 30s. You can kind of see that. And, again, more just neat photographs of this time frame. Now what's really fascinating is from 35 and to 36 you can actually see, again, the idea is the same and it's true to kind of the core, but you, again, the audience. In fact, in 36 there was a book that came out by C. Irving Benson called 8 Points of the Oxford Group, and this guy's a very interesting guy. This guy is a superintendent of the Melbourne, Australia's Wesleyan Church, and he wrote an amazing. It's called 8 Points of the Oxford Group. We would look at something like this and maybe take the word tenets from it or possibly steps, but you be the judge. Again, when you open it up, you can see that some information works, but there's also some that doesn't. But when you look at the table of contents, of course, it looks pretty innocent, but then you open it and you actually read it. Chapter 1 was God has a plan for everyone, the surrender, right? Step 3, the surrender. Chapter 2, confession is good for the soul. There's the sharing aspect. You have that's chapter 3. If thy brother hath aught against thee, there's restitution. How about daily checking with the 4 absolutes? Is what I'm about to think, say, or do right or wrong, true or false, ugly or beautiful, and how will it help somebody else? My favorite, be still and know, the quiet time. That is pretty much step 11. And of course, don't be an ass. Guidance. That's always good. Bounce your great ideas off your sponsor. Life changers all, sharing witness. That's the most unique one. How cool is that? And of course, lo, here is a fellowship. And I like the first paragraph so much I added it. It says, one man is no man. We need each other to realize ourselves. The story of human life on this planet is the record of man's slow learning of life's law of fellowship. First came the family, then the tribe, then the clan, and finally the nation. Pretty fascinating. Again, when we look at it in terms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and especially with some of our traditions, we were talking about tradition one and a couple of days ago, or even last night, maybe. But no alcoholic can pretty much recover without a group, and that's just an interesting thing there. But again, going to the literature of this time frame, this was 6 Points of the Oxford Group. Another book which was pretty incredible was Life Changers by Harold Bigby Moore, Twice Born Men. You also had Four Sinners Only by A.J. Russell, and of course his full name is Arthur James Russell, but this again came out in the early of 32, and we used the example of that change that Buckman had in Keswick. But what's really interesting in 35, he also wrote this, The God Calling by Two Listeners, and that was one of the earliest versions. But when you look at in terms of I guess literature of the time, you had these daily reflection type kind of points of origin. You had God Calling by Two Listeners. You had My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers. These were basically these daily spiritual reflect and insight that you could take. You also had Victor Kitchen's I Was a Pagan, and a couple of versions of that book, one by the HS printers Harper, and then the other one by Harper Brothers. You had Life Began Yesterday by Stephen Foote. Again, great insight into these. You also had Cecil Rose's When Man Listens, a couple of versions of that, one from early and then one after it changed its name from Oxford Group to pretty much Moral Rearmament. But pretty amazing. You also had start to have like pamphlets. Pamphlets really started to appear in droves, and we were talking about this earlier. You know, they didn't have a conference approved thing, so anybody could really write a spiritual pamphlet, and they would push it, and it's a great kind of keeping that in mind. But How to Listen to God by John E. Batterson was a great pamphlet. Another one was Sharing by Julian Dewsbury. Again, from his continued support of the Oxford Group was not only understood even by his best friends, pretty fascinating, but sharing. And that was an interesting caption. But this actually came from a pamphlet called "How Do I Believe?" or "Begin." And these are two pamphlets about, pretty much it sums it up. How do I begin? How do I start this journey? Clear Sky Ahead has to do with the process. Again, that's a pretty rare pamphlet that is describes a lot. And then going to Eleanor Ford, the one that was Jim Newton again. Got Jim Newton involved in the Oxford Group, and he was the result from Bud Firestone and the Oxford Group coming to Akron. But this was Jim's future wife, Eleanor Ford. She's the one that converted Jim Newton. We covered him last week, but when we look at her, the guidance of God, right? If you ask God for direction or a sign or help, you got to quiet the mind so that the answers will come. And it's a great pamphlet that she wrote. And what's really fascinating is when you flip it all the way to the end, these are the Oxford Group pamphlets that were around at that point. A great snapshot. And again, you can see what we just described. I Was a Pagan. What is the Oxford Group? For Sinners Only, Life Changers, Children of the Second Birth by Sam Shoemaker, Twice Born Ministers by Sam Shoemaker, Conversions of the Church by Sam Shoemaker, and several others. But what's really cool is all the way down at the bottom, the Quiet Time, and we referred to that again. Quiet Time by our Reverend H.J. Rose. And again, this quiet time was a core practice of the Oxford Group movement. It was and remains a practice of sitting in silence, listening to the inner voice, to God, to the voice of conscience. Quiet time guidance to search for inner direction, correction, and inspiration. A great description of what quiet time is. And what's really interesting, there's another pamphlet on quiet time that came out, and it was When I Awake by Jack Winslow. And that's one of the coolest kind of at least instructions. And we'll get into that for in a second. But again, we're looking at 38, When I Awake, and all about that quiet time. And here's a neat picture of the morning quiet time in operation. And basically it shows pretty much everybody, the practice in action. They would sit down and of course, have that little moment of meditation. That Jack Winslow pamphlet, the morning, the quiet time, was actually remade, and you can actually get a copy of it. It was called, changed its name to the Morning Quiet Time. It is, if you look at that internet website code, it'll take you right to it, and you can download it. But it's an incredible description. Again, when you read that and you apply that to your 11th step, it's insane. It's really amazing. But again, this was all, Oxford Group literature at that time frame. Now, again, we're in 36, so this is where things, again, start going a little, and not just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Time magazine actually had Buckman on their cover, and the caption was a little interesting. They called it Cultist Buckman. Again, Buckman and the Oxford Group, by this time, they were pretty well known. And of course, also in 1936, there was a tiny little hiccup for the organization. And of course, again, immediately following the Olympic Games in Germany, Buckland sailed back to America on August 19th, 1936. Now, arriving in New York, Buckland held a press conference at Calvary House from which a number of journalists set off their routine stories. There was a reporter of the afternoon paper, the New York World Telegram, that had actually arrived a little late and asked for a special interview. His name was William H. Bernini. And of course, Buckman gave him that interview. He took his notes, went back and wrote his article, and the World Telegram came out. Again, this was an interesting, article relating to the Oxford Group at the time, and talks about what his experience was in Germany. Pretty innocent until you start reading it and you get down to that little line like there. And of course, I thank heaven for a man like Adolf Hitler who built a frontline defense against the Antichrist of communism. So, yeah, that might cause a little people to go sideways, but if you go to the continued on page 6 page, you see this. And of course, the headline, thank heaven for a man like Hitler. You can tell where that went absolutely sideways. But again, this was just that little hiccup that happened from him returning. He also brought back several other ideas, but again, you look at the times of the world, and that's how it was portrayed. Thank heaven for a man like Hitler. So there's that article that you know didn't damage, but again, a lot of people, including some future AA members, were taken back. And this was where they really kicked it up a notch. I don't know. This was the America Awake Oxford Group campaign that came out in 36. And boy, did they get busy. There's a couple of captions, but when you look at in terms of the message, America Awake, right? Pretty vibrant, And of course, good housekeeping, the October 36 issue, and Emily Blair wrote How the Oxford Group Changes America article. And what's really fascinating, when you open it up, it talks about kind of their claim party. And this was the thing, the Awake campaign launch that took place in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And it was one of the biggest house parties. Again, time frame 36. This was one of the songs, but you can see, clearly see, things such as, they start having a flag ceremony and all kinds of, interesting, kind of stuff. And there's another photograph of the flag. Again, flags of all our nations, National Assembly, Stockbridge, May 30th, 36. And some of those flags you recognize, and especially there's one in the middle, but this was that time frame 36 again, but it was huge. Again, when we look at this was the everybody walking to the thing, workers from farm to city, when man listens, God speak. Boy, if that's not guidance in a lunch sack. Also, Oxford, from Oxford, England, and then the delegates just kept going down the thing. They actually had a full page description in the newspaper. Again, clearly the America Awake front and center right there. But what's interesting is who actually spoke at this house party. It is the who's who of VIPs. You had Victor Kitchen, who wrote I Was a Pagan. He did about a 2-hour talk. You had Stephen Foote, Life Began Yesterday. He did his talk as well. Sam Shoemaker actually did 2 talks. He was one of the keynote speakers there. So all these people are all under the same roof. You had Mr. and Mrs. Francis Shep Cornell. They both gave 2 talks, which is pretty fascinating. And then my favorite person, if you remember what started this whole thing when it came to alcoholics getting sober all the way back at Penn State University, you got Mr. Bill Pickles sitting right there. Again, he is still sober and carrying the Oxford Group message at that time. Couple of people that are interesting, at least later on down the road in AA history. There's a reference to a man by the name of Sir Philip Dundas. Anybody in Scotland? Just their own history, and to give you just a quick pick, Philip Dundas. Evidently, he's an alcoholic. I don't know if he got permanently sober in the Oxford Group, but down the road when AA started, he definitely joined AA because he was the one that brought Alcoholics Anonymous into Scotland, with at least he gets credit with it. So there's a photograph of Sir Philip Dennis with Bill Wilson, but here he is in this 36 house party. So he'd been involved in this process. And of course, Loudon Hamilton also, and then not listed on this page, but another paper, none other than Roland Hazard. He was one of the other keynote speakers. And what's really cool, again, this was all took place at Stockbridge, Massachusetts, the America Awake campaign. Here's Sam Shoemaker with his kind of quote, his flock, and here he was doing his thing. Just interesting, amazing photographs of this whole process. This I love this photograph. This one was a recent acquisition. But if you look onto the left side, kind of above the crowd, you'll see all the movie cameras. And yes, they actually recorded it and made a movie. And it was one of the Oxford group like sessions. It was called Stockbridge 36 from Pave. Great little scene. You can see it, and we'll talk afterwards how you can view these. But again, here's the Buckman with again all anybody and everybody. Here he is with a Indian shams. Pretty chief to truth. Pretty cool. Again, they also had their literature setups, kind of like their literature racks, and kind of glazes what Alcoholics Anonymous. But the usual is there for Sinners Only. Life Began Yesterday, I Was a Pagan, pamphlets, the whole 9 yards. Also the first use, and there was something else that came out at that time frame from Stockbridge. Another movie, Bridge Builders, was an interesting description of their practice. And of course, the next slide that you capture the greatest bridge builders in the world, the Oxford Group. So pretty cool. Again, all of this. Sam Shoemaker uses the term bridge builders, and kind of really goes to town with that. Now, again, 1936, the time where Bill and Lois were kind of actually slowly, popping up on the radar, not in a particularly good way, but slowly pointed out as focusing on drunkards, right? The bottom of the barrel. How can they be, the VIPs or leaders when they're working with, bottom of the barrel drunks? Again, having drunks only meeting at their home. And of course, in the months from 36 up to their official break from the Oxford Group, it is described that they were accused of not being maximum with their Oxford Group circles. So kind of a little, turbulence for those. In fact, Lois remembers the Wilsons, and Lois remembers the Wilsons attended their last major Oxford Group house party at the Thayer Hotel in West Point, New York, January 37. Unknown if anything negative happened there. Lois never mentions any type of confrontation, but this was kind of the last entry for this type of house party that we saw that Bill went to one a house party in Richmond, and of course there are several letters of them attending house parties throughout, and this one got the claim. Also in this 1937 time frame, we're looking at Life magazine. Pretty fascinating because there is a great description of the Oxford Group in this whole thing, and of course, the General Hayashi was the cover, again looking at the time frame and of the world at large. But just a quick view of what the Oxford Group was doing in this article. And when you open it up again, Buckman's Oxford Groupers marching as to war, and boy were they. And, you look at kind of the organization. You definitely get this militant vibe from it. And when we look at how that would apply to alcoholics, trying to stay sober and not die, you can easily see the at least the decision making process. And of course, more of the house parties in that article. And it's a good thing that when we sit down and do the serenity prayer, we don't have to pretty much partake in calisthenics. Again, this is just an interesting description of a day in the life that was in that Life magazine article, and of course, several of the photographs that follow. In fact, we actually have a caption. This is 1937. This is about approximately 2 minutes long, but it'll give you an idea of what exactly was going on at the time, and it is as follows.
Heading towards Birmingham come 2,000 young men from 23 nations to conquer the world for God and Dr. Frank Buckman's Oxford Group. Some people call the Oxford Group a new religion. Others, less tolerant, call it just a pleasant way of spending the bank holiday weekend. But so much interest and enthusiasm is being aroused by this new movement that we are presenting these pictures of the group's Birmingham house party, as it's called. At 6 a.m., the entire party leaps out of bed, goes for a run, takes exercises to clear mind and soul for the day. At 7 a.m. comes breakfast, and plenty of it, for good food means health, and health is one of the basic rules of the Oxford Group. Then there's marching and parading, with every member of the party organized into youth brigades. But the main business of the day takes place in the British Industries Fair Hall, where the 2,000 groupers sit on mats on the floor and listen to speeches. Mostly they are middle-class youths, clerks, college boys and workers, who have found their careers inadequate without the Oxford Group. The main thing they learn is the importance of God control in daily life. But as this is also coronation year, some of the time is spent in drawing up a loyal address to their Majesties the King and Queen. And with the leader carrying the address in front of a panoply of waving flags, comes the march to the post office to post it. Whatever part the Oxford Group is destined to play in the national life, few can deny that this Birmingham party is one of the biggest spiritual gatherings of the century.
So pretty cool how that just unfolded, and they did that a lot again with the youthful crowd, and who they were bringing into the fold, and talk about energy. This one's another interesting one. This was Regina, June of 37, in Regina, Canada. But again, Oxford Group, new camp, new empire, and goes from there. Now, the question in their minds, again, with Bill and Lois at this time frame, what does this have to do with an alcoholic staying sober and literally not dying? And of course, by August of 1937, Bill and Lois and the rest of the New York drunks officially cut ties with the Oxford Group. But the Akron Group stays affiliated for a further 2 more years. And the reason is, if you think about it, they had that type of drunk squad for the Oxford Group set up. It was small. They interacted. They were kind of a circle within the circle out there. It just kind of fell in that way. I don't know if it was attempted in New York, but it definitely did not get any traction. And long story short, the New York crowd branched, and from here, Bill and a couple of the New York individuals went to Akron and basically had this, counting noses meeting. Where do we go from here? And that led to the December 1937 decision to pretty much write a book, and that's a whole nother story. But from the Oxford Group standpoint, we're looking at the very early spring 38. This was the Oxford Group book list. This was a pamphlet that they sent out. You can order any of the again, it's a great snapshot of not only the books, but also the magazine called Rising Tide, and several of these little pamphlets or booklets, plus the music of the time. I mean, they were really, again, getting, you could see the music, Bridge Builders, old Wise Old Horsey, New Frontiersman, and again, Bridge Builders, Drums of Peace. So, they were just going there. And when we look at the 38 time frame, the Oxford Group declares themselves moral rearmament. So at some point, at least in the description, Oxford University, realized that things were a little, just kind of taken aback, and so they decided, you know, you can't use our name in your movement anymore, and that's when they decided to scrap the Oxford Group and become moral rearmament, and that took place in 38. In fact, this was the newspaper when they had their kind of coming out party in uh, all over the place. And again, moral rearmament, world war is price of world selfishness. So you could see why they did that. Here's a great caption of the actual the whole thing, and up on the stage again, Frank Buckman. You can clearly see Samuel Schumacher and a couple of other well-to-dos, including a tennis star, and we'll get to him in a second. But that was their official, MRA, a call to the nations. And this was, again, just another note of what the world looked like at this time frame. 1938, September, Hitler threatened to invade Czechoslovakia, but a meeting in Munich, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain negotiated what he famously called peace for our time. He allowed Hitler to dismember Czechoslovakia, and in the end, he only delayed the inevitable future world at war since Hitler kept seizing territory. But this was when they were, again, called to all nations. And it could be described that maybe they were just trying to become a not a world power for God. Again, Oxford Group, the tiny little house parties seem to be phased out in lieu of bigger halls, venues, audiences, and influence. Here we are going into 1939, and this was an interesting photograph taken at the City Hall. Again, the MRA. There's Bunny Austin, again, the tennis star, none other than Mina Edison. Yes, Bud Firestone worked for Thomas Edison, and eventually Mina Edison came into the fold and became a speaker, and along with a representative from France seen there. Here's another photograph again of the San Francisco Moral Rearmament Day, Golden Gate International Expedition, and they're doing it to it. They also had the Scottish delegation, which is awesome. They came full tilt in the kilt. But again, all this was July 39. And then we go to this. This was another Oxford Group photograph. And just to describe who's who, there's a couple of names I underline. For starters, there's Mr. Bill Pickle. That's right, 1910, the first alcoholic that changed at Penn State YMCA. He is still a part of everything. You got Frank Buckman there. You got Mina Edison, Mrs. Thomas Edison. You also have Eleanor Ford, who wrote the pamphlet Guided by God, none other than Jim Newton, the man responsible of getting Bud Firestone and the Oxford Group coming to Akron, all in this one little photograph. Pretty fascinating stuff. And of course, just a cycle of different shots, honesty, unselfishness, right? This is all good stuff. But again, the time, moral rearmament, and you're enlist for a fear-free, hate-free, greed-free America. Listen with 1 million others. We accuse Bill of having a big ego, but again, this did good, and several other photographs of house parties and meetings, and seeing here somebody sharing as witness. So pretty fascinating again. And then this particular one with Sam Shoemaker doing what he does off to the side. Just an incredible. Everybody's crowding around. Frank Buckman. He was kind of the lightning rod, and Sam was always in the shadows, just doing his deal. He always kept core to the early purpose, and just an amazing story. This was a cartoon I found, kind of relation leading up to the World War II time frame. So it's like traditional, society versus, the MRA's version. And I just thought that was an interesting depiction of the time. And again, another photograph. This one's pretty well circulated, but you got Eleanor Ford, Frank Buckman, Louis Mayer, and Mina Edison, and of course you can see Jim Newton off to the side. Now, what's interesting is Jim Newton, after this time frame, became kind of full tilt into this movement. Here he is actually meeting a very young senator by the name of Richard Nixon. So I thought that was an interesting photograph. Jim Newton with Richard Nixon. Here's another one, same time frame, just a different shot. This one's for a friend of mine in Boston. This is a photograph of Frank Buckman with Peyton Treadway, congressman, and again, a senator from Missouri, Senator Harry S. Truman in the mix. But again, when you look at it, it was pretty much, going from, the personal spiritual change to, the Oxford group and now MRA, and it leads into the Hollywood, California, pretty much the bowl there, and a couple of billboards that were seen. They actually this time started packing stadiums. This is the Hollywood Bowl in California, setting up for the house party that was going to happen that night. And again, as the procession started off, it pretty much told the tale of what was going on at the time: new men, new nations, and a new world. And it in full action. And what's really fascinating is those four beams of light, and we'll just look at a couple of photographs of this from different angles. But what's really cool is they were at this particular shot, there's only three, but they were describing what those beams of light were. And of course, those beams of light represent the four absolutes. So four spires of light at the end. Again, the four absolutes, which became, that's what those four lines are on all their pamphlets. The MRA are the four absolutes of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. And again, do the same thing all over the place. This was Madison Square Garden in 1939, Moral Rearmament Week, May 7th through the 14th. Here's a headline that was outside tonight: Moral Rearmament Meeting, and of course other agendas. But from here, going all the way pretty much through the thing again, Frank Buckman, doing his thing all through this. And I don't think I'm going to get to the letter, but all of this is what took place inside Madison Square Garden. So these are all photographs of the gathering, and of course the new nations, a new world, the whole nine yards. And again, back in San Francisco, just the March of Flags, so you can easily see the transition, and especially when and why we broke away. I'm not going to get to it, but there is a letter that Sam wrote because we are still in 1939, and by 1941, I think it's 41, Sam wrote a letter to his parish saying, that the new Calvary church and Calvary House are kind of breaking away from the moral rearmament themselves. And Sam Shoemaker keeps his, deep rooted, personal spiritual change campaign, and keeps to his early, individual type setups that he has, and again, kind of kicks the Oxford group to the curb, have you will. But again, it all did a matter of good, and I think I'm out of time. And a great place to end is just it's a good thing we don't do some of this stuff at our AA meetings. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Rob, and thank you for allowing me to share.
Drew, thank you so much.